The early 2000s. America was riding high on a wave of prosperity. Low interest rates made borrowing easy. People were buying homes, many for the first time. The American dream seemed within reach for millions. But this seemingly rosy picture masked a dangerous reality. A housing bubble was inflating, fueled by risky lending practices. Financial institutions eager to cash in were offering mortgages to borrowers with poor credit and low incomes, the so-called subprime borrowers. These loans, bundled and sold as complex financial products, were treated as safe investments, the assumption house prices would keep going up. But like all bubbles, this one was destined to burst. When house prices started to fall, the system began to unravel. Subprime borrowers, unable to repay their loans, began to default in droves. The consequences would be devastating, not just for the United States, but for the entire global economy. Imagine a house of cards. Each card represents a mortgage. The sturdier cards at the bottom are prime mortgages given to borrowers with good credit. They're considered safe, but as you move up, the cards become flimsier. These are the subprime mortgages. They're riskier because they're given to borrowers less likely to repay. Wall Street, always looking for new ways to make money, bundled these subprime mortgages with other loans and sold them as complex investments called mortgage-backed securities. Investors, blinded by the promise of high returns, ignored the risks. They didn't realize the house of cards was built on shaky ground. When house prices started to fall, the subprime cards at the top started to tumble. Defaults mounted and the losses spread like wildfire through the financial system. The house of cards collapsed, taking the global economy down with it. The first cracks appeared in 2007. Subprime mortgage defaults were rising, and investors were getting nervous. The stock market, a barometer of economic health, began to gyrate wildly. By the summer of 2008, it was clear the financial system was in serious trouble. Financial institutions burdened with toxic assets linked to subprime mortgages were on the brink of collapse. Bear Stearns, a venerable investment bank, was the first major domino to fall, forced into a fire sale to JP Morgan Chase in March 2008. The panic was spreading. As the crisis deepened, credit markets froze. Banks, afraid to lend to each other, hoarded cash. Businesses couldn't get the loans they needed to operate. Consumers, facing job losses and a shrinking economy, cut back on spending. The United States was sliding into its worst economic downturn since the Great Depression. Section 4, Lehman Brothers, The Giant Falls, September 15, 2008. A date etched in the annals of financial history. Lehman Brothers, a 158-year-old investment bank once considered too big to fail, filed for bankruptcy, the largest in American history. The news sent shockwaves through the global financial system. Lehman's collapse was a watershed moment. It signaled that no financial institution, no matter how large or venerable, was immune to the crisis. The panic reached fever pitch. Stock markets plunged. Credit markets seized up completely. The global economy was in free fall. The collapse of Lehman Brothers was a brutal wake-up call. It exposed the interconnectedness of the global financial system and the dangers of unregulated risk-taking. The world watched in disbelief as the financial system teetered on the brink. Section 5. A global contagion from the US to the world. The 2008 financial crisis was not just an American crisis, it was a global crisis. The interconnectedness of the global financial system meant that the toxic subprime mortgages that originated in the US had spread like a virus, infecting financial institutions and economies around the world. European banks, heavily invested in US mortgage-backed securities, found themselves holding billions of dollars in toxic assets. Countries like Iceland, Ireland, and Greece, which had enjoyed booming economies, were plunged into deep recessions. The crisis highlighted the importance of international cooperation. Governments and central banks around the world realized they needed to work together to stabilize the global financial system and prevent a catastrophic meltdown. Section 6. Emergency measures. Governments and central banks intervene. As the crisis spiraled out of control, governments and central banks around the world took unprecedented steps to avert a complete financial meltdown. They provided trillions of dollars in bailouts to struggling banks, cut interest rates to near zero, and launched massive stimulus packages to boost their economies. In the US, the government enacted the Troubled Asset Relief Program, TARP, which authorized the Treasury Department to purchase toxic assets from banks. The Federal Reserve, the country's central bank, pumped trillions of dollars into the financial system to keep credit flowing. These extraordinary measures, while controversial, were credited with preventing a complete collapse of the global financial system. They bought time for economies to stabilize and for policymakers to implement reforms to prevent a similar crisis from happening again. Section 7. The Aftermath, Lessons Learned and the Path to Recovery. The 2008 financial crisis was a painful but necessary wake-up call. It exposed the flaws in the global financial system, from lax regulation and excessive risk-taking to the dangers of complex financial products. In the aftermath of the crisis, governments and financial institutions around the world implemented reforms aimed at preventing a repeat of the crisis. New regulations were put in place to strengthen financial institutions, increase transparency in the financial system, and protect consumers from predatory lending practices. The crisis also led to a renewed focus on the importance of financial literacy and the need for individuals to take greater responsibility for their own financial well-being. The road to recovery was long and arduous, but the global economy eventually emerged